Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all on behalf of the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy. A warm welcome also to Professor Anirban Chakraborty, who has made the trip to campus to join us today. We're very much looking forward to hearing from you. My name is Manasa, and I'm joined today by my fellow center coordinator, Harpreet, in hosting today's program. We are, of course, gathered here today to celebrate the launch of a new book, Quantum Decision Theory and Complexity Modeling in Economics and Public Policy, which is based on an interdisciplinary and international conference held in JGU. Economics Windows series by Springer Nature, which is Scopus indexed and highly acclaimed. The volume builds upon the emerging fields of econ physics, complexity theory, and quantum-like modeling in cognition and social sciences, and their plausible applications in economics and public policy. The critical reviews presented in this book are intended not only to stimulate further scholarly interest, but also interest among policy practitioners towards creating a new paradigm for comprehending pressing issues. Over the course of today's event, we'll hear from various editors, Professor Anirban Chakraborty, Professor Sunil Patra, Professor Naresh Singh, as well as the faculty members that are present today that have contributed to the book, like Professor Devajit Jha, Professor Sunitra Ghatak, and Professor Tariq Hussain. However, we are very delighted to have our beloved dean, Professor Sudarshan, who has agreed to give the opening remarks regarding the book. With master's degree in politics from Oxford University and a fellowship at Cambridge, Professor Sudarshan has distinguished careers in domains of research, development, programming, and governance. In the past, Professor Sudarshan has worked with Ford Foundation and UNDP, amongst the other distinguished organizations. Our dean has been an important supporter and facilitator for Center's work, and we're very grateful to have you today. Without any further ado, we invite you, sir, for the opening remarks.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be beloved. But you omitted to mention that my first master's in economics.
Oh, we're sorry about that.
That's quite all right, because I consider myself a lapsed or an elapsed economist, having stopped serious study of the subject after I finished the Delhi School of Economics. It was such a rigorous and highly theoretical program that thought that I had enough of that. But I'm, but still, since I spent 5 years studying economics, a bit of it is still left in me. Now, of course, it's public policy for the last, since 2012 when school started. So I'm very intrigued by a book which has a title, Quantum Decision Theory and Complexity Modeling in Economics and Public Policy. It's the last bit that I can claim to know a little bit about. But what goes before that is something which is a complete black hole to me. And when I say that, I don't mean that I desire to be sucked into that black hole. It's more appropriate, possibly, to say it's a black box. But it is. There are some questions that I think would come up in discussion. I haven't yet read the book. One of them is that there's generally people, when they initiate something new nowadays, tend to hype it up and make it as if it's a paradigm shift. Right now, it may be true when Thomas Kuhn pointed out that in physics there was indeed a paradigm shift. He had a good sound basis for using that expression. But now the paradigm shift as a phrase has become commonplace. Everything you want to say, I'm doing something interesting or I'm doing something new, people proclaim it's a paradigm shift. Now, with respect to a discipline like economics, it's not the kind of discipline like physics. I mean, economics is said to have a physics envy, but it's not that you get any paradigm shift in economics. So my view, and I don't know if I'm right or wrong, or whether you agree with me, is that complexity theory can enrich economic theory and can advance it with respect to its principal considerations, which is people's welfare. The first welfare theorem is indeed Adam Smith and how individual agents acting apparently in their self-interest without any knowledge of what might happen in the aggregate might, in given certain conditions, reach a state which is called Pareto optimal, in which where you can't make anyone better off without making someone worse off. Now that's established in economics. It's been proved in Debreu and Arrow have all established why that is also logical and mathematically sound. That view. Now, when you bring in something like complexity, I'm not sure whether if you're going to change anything very radically. You will certainly be able to enrich the field, I think. And the kind of differences between the sort of standard basic general equilibrium model in economics, which has a heterogeneous set of actors and interdependencies among the actors, and you get certain outcomes that in a sense could be anticipated. Now complexity could enrich all that, it seems to me, but I don't know. I'm posing this as a question as to what extent might it be sort of a very radical turn. I mean, you see, economics is a fine discipline because it's continually adapting. We have a whole field of behavioral economics, which, after all these randomized control trials and so on, and in the field of macroeconomics has been a continual exploration of how do you cope with what you didn't know. You didn't know 2008 financial crisis, what are the circumstances that brought it about. And so the microeconomic foundations of macroeconomics is something that has interested economists and have been doing. So my hunch is that even when it comes to questions of evaluation, right, economics plays a part in evaluating. So you have, in the Gita, you have a conflict between what you might call the right and the good. Arjuna says, no good will come from this war. He's right. No good did come from that war. And Krishna says, no, you have to do the right thing. Right? So when you're evaluating, you can take a consequentialist perspective, like Arjuna, or you can be principled. You can say, you have to, the results of our evaluation have to be based on certain principles. Hayek was a champion of a principled approach, and whereas much of evaluation is consequentialist. So I think complexity is a field which has something to say about this. If we can make this more rigorous, make our understanding more clear as to whether you are going to be a consequentialist or a principled thing, or whether in fact you need to make such a distinction between the two. It's not as if you have to rule out the one in order to be able to do the other. So in all of these, I think this is very exciting to be in the frontier, in the forefront of this, contributing to economics and public policy, which of course has to do with human welfare, which is where economics is starting. So I'm very excited to hear that we have 3 of the 4 editors of this book around the table. This is an important occasion, and so I look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your generous and insightful words. We shall now move on to the co-editors of the book, who will discuss their vision and their thoughts on the field. We begin first with Professor Anirban Chakrabarty, our esteemed guest who joins us from JNU to be with us today. Professor Anirban Chakrabarty is currently a professor at the School of Computational and Integrative Sciences at JNU. He was the former Dean, School of Engineering and Technology, and the Dean of Research at BNL Munjal University in Gurgaon. He's a founding member of the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy. He has obtained a PhD in physics from Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics in India and later completed the habilitation HDR in physics from Université Pierre et Marie Curie in France. He has more than 2 decades of experience as a scientist, working in many reputed universities and research institutions in India, Europe, Japan, and the USA. He was awarded the prestigious Young Scientist Medal in 2009, and his scholarly works include several books, edited volumes, book chapters, and research articles which have received international acclaim. Professor Anirban, stage is yours.
Thank Professor Sudarshan, Professor Naresh Singh, and the faculty and student coordinators for inviting me. And it's always nice to be back. My first visit was in the conference February 2020, when Sudhir, Professor Naresh, they had organized this meeting. And I was participating as one of the sort of champions in econometrics. My PhD was in the topic of income and wealth distribution. As you heard, I was a physicist, so I used certain models in physics to inspiration and applied them to finding the income and wealth distribution. And like what Sudarshan was saying, the Pareto law, which is one of the very strong empirical laws in economics. We were trying to give a sort of a microeconomics basis to why do Pareto laws being observed throughout the history in every form of society, irrespective of the country, irrespective of the time, irrespective of the economy. You have certain features of the wealth distribution. Why do we observe? So I was like a scientist trying to understand what type of interactions amongst human beings or economic agents can give rise to the Pareto law. That was my approach when I joined the university and started working. And then over the next 2 or more decades, I got in different other fields, including there was a lot of combinations of complex systems, multi-agent modeling, and because physicists were always there were a lot of interest in studying in the microscopic, the link between the microscopic world and macroscopic things. So similar in economics, macroeconomic behavior and the macroeconomic observations. So there has been a long exchange of ideas between economics and physics, and I don't know how many of you are aware that the first Nobel laureate in economics, Jan Tinbergen, had a PhD in physics. His title, he had his PhD under Paul Ehrenfest, a very well-known physicist, and his title of his thesis was Minimization Problems in Energy and Economics. So you see often that there were people who were physicists and then migrated into economics, and including his optimization, the Hamiltonian dynamics played a very influential role when Paul Samuelson was developing the integrated maximization principles. So in the course of my research, I learned that often these problems that we try to solve requires a more interdisciplinary and holistic approach. So it is not a problem only the economics can solve, or only the physicists can solve, or only the scientists can solve, or only the public policy. It requires a more holistic approach, I would say. And just after the conference, we had several panel discussions, and the pandemic had already set in. We inaugurated the center, and I remember that. We conducted a number of panel discussions online, very good response from international and national scholars. And what is going is this, this whole principle of having a more holistic approach. We had a lot of debates how we should name the center also. But this word applies spirituality. I was coming from GM, and many of my colleagues didn't like why did the word spirituality is imported to a center's name. I said, but what do we mean by spirituality? And then I had shared a quote, and Naresh has had the experience of working with research sets. So I often quote in many of my lectures and quote before I teach the students. So he was a US advisor to the government. And he said that, now I thought that 30 years of good science, we could address the problems of environmental problems, climate change and biodiversity loss. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists do not know how to do it. So the thing is, most of us, and that is what your mainstream economics will teach you also, that the agents are supposed to be rational. They are supposed to be maximizing their own utility. So they are self-centered and they are selfish. And Adam Smith's thing was the agents are selfish. Everybody tries to earn their rent, and the society self-organizes. But then you have many people who are not selfish, and that is what we call irrational behavior. And you see that only in the 70s, late 70s, the concept of irrationality started entering mainstream economics, as late as the 1970s. So when we started doing these models, we first started with ones of rational agents who were selfish, and that's why we use eight vertical formulations. But then we had to incorporate a lot of things which were irrational, and that's how the behavioral sciences, behavioral economics is now taking a transformation. That we are trying to incorporate a lot of these irrational things into it. Now, what happens is, in terms of maths, it becomes more complicated. It's much easier to write a cost function and maximize or minimize. But if I have agents who have different cost functions, then I try to maximize and then some not follow any rational principle. Then I cannot, get a sort of a macroscopic image from the microscopic image. Now, fortunately, in physics, we are used to dealing with large number of atoms, molecules. So if I just take this glass of bottle of water, you will have 10 to the power of 23 molecules of water, right? And each molecule has an identical structure, H2O, two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. Now that's the advantage that all the water molecules are identical. When we are dealing with the society, each one of us have different. What we were saying, heterogeneity. Each of the agents behave in a very different way. And if I study the behavior of students who are in isolation, I cannot predict what she will do in the collective. What she will do with everything. Oh, with everything, right. And the second is, in the collective, we take completely different decisions, right? So there is this interesting play of the individual versus the collective. That we were discussing in terms of public policy meetings, when we were discussing the behavior of bureaucrats during the lands. In India, for example, we were saying that the bureaucrats are trained to be very individualistic and they think about themselves more probably than the country, whereas in China probably it's not. And that makes a lot of difference when you're implementing the policies or having the diplomatic relations. So when we are dealing with societal matters and the society comes first, the country comes first, the whole thing can change whether I put myself first or I put my country first. Right? And that is what Substack was also saying. That when I talk about spiritual transformation, it's trying to teach you that you have to think beyond me and myself. If I put always me and myself on top, then I have complete different set of concepts. And if I put the country or society at large, or the planet at large, so that's why when you try to solve problems as complicated as climate change, sustainability, why are we having this difficulty? Because we are trained to think in a rational and maybe in a very selfish sense. As a human society, most of us have had hundreds of years of genetic evolution thinking. This is what sort of embedded into your genes. So for your own survival, you are trained to be selfish. You will think about your survival first, and then think about the survival of this thing. Remember Darwin's theory. So 2 years ago, I was giving a lecture. Remember when this conference came where you also participated? And I thought that actually Darwin had told that which creature survives, not the one which actually is the one which adapts. Okay. So adaptability is something which actually helps the population or an individual to survive. So now these principles have to be incorporated when we are making public policies. If I am too rigid, then I cannot, my thinking will not last long. And sometimes that rigidity we see in all our laws and public policy. So as the school of governance and public policy, I think it's one of the mandates, how do I incorporate different principles, adaptive principles. And the approach we were taking is that your data talks about it. So if I take a policy, if I make it on the basis of data, so data-driven public policy, that would give you a different, sort of. So when we started discussing over, most of the people who have contributed to the chapters in this book, they have given their own perspectives, and they come from different backgrounds. We had economists, we had physicists, we had mathematicians, we had evolutionary biologists, and we had psychologists and sociologists also participating. So it was a very, like I mentioned, it was very interdisciplinary and holistic approach, and that's what we are trying to cover in this book. And we are glad that many of them have been able to come because due to the pandemic, it got delayed. We had to, it was difficult for meeting because we were not being able to meet in person. We had to push a lot. We were ourselves not well. It got delayed because for several months I was not well. And thanks for all your patience and I must again, like you said, solutions. They did tremendous role in getting us together, encouraging right from the start, having this center in this place, and getting us together and facilitating science and I look forward to receiving your comments, especially. Thank you very much. And that's very much.
Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing your thoughts. We really appreciate you coming all the way down here and joining us here on campus. It was very insightful. Moving on to the next contributors, we have Professor Sudeep Bajwa, who's an associate professor at JSGP. He's also a founding member at CIAS. Professor Sudeep has earned his PhD in mathematical modeling and finance from the University of Glasgow, Scotland, with a prior physics background, and he's also a research fellow. Sir has been invited to different prestigious institutions such as IIT Bombay, Aston University, UK, Thailand. His forthcoming publications also include a book co-authored with Professor Partha Ghosh on interdisciplinary approach to cognitive modeling, which is also to be published by Rootbridge. Professor, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I should say that it is really a special occasion for all of us because this is the conference which actually laid the foundation for our center, and it's really a very happy moment to see that it is coming to kind of like a full circle. I would say that I was just listening to both Professor Sudarshan and Professor Chakraborty, and I was trying to see that how to kind of relate to all of that. So the first part of the book deals with quantum-like modeling, or it has been called as quantum decision theory. There are many names have been used. Quantum cognition modeling, many people have been saying. So let me just harp a bit on that. So what we are trying to say. So you see that from both of Dean's and Professor Chakraborty's message, one thing that came up is basically two things. One is principles. So which are the principles that we can look into to understand this complex adaptive system called as society or economy or whatever. Now, very interestingly, if we go back to the history of quantum physics, say in 1920s, and Professor Chakraborty can correct me, the founders of this particular discipline, like Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and many others, they were thinking of certain interesting philosophical principles. Like, for example, contextuality. So you really need to understand the context when these observations are made or measurements are made. Or say, for example, uncertainty. So there's a kind of like a radical uncertainty in this world, along with epistemic uncertainty or ignorance, which you cannot avoid. So that was one very important philosophical principle quantum physics gave us. And also networks. It has been called as non-locality in quantum physics, but we can think about the deep networks which are important. Now, very interestingly, this is a bit forgotten history, but during 1920s, there was some interesting interdisciplinary thinking happened. Say, for example, if you read some of the, at times they are called impenetrable writings of Niels Bohr, it's very difficult to understand. But Niels Bohr had this idea that these philosophical principles or the mathematical, structures which are coming up, they can be used in other domains of knowledge also. And he was having some interesting dialogues with psychologists and philosophers of his time. Later on, Pauli, another very kind of like gigantic mind in quantum physics, Wolfgang Pauli. So he had a very long conversation with, the psychoanalyst of his time, Carl Jung. And a few years back, actually, a book has been published on their conversation. So these were like some kind of roots which were showing that there is a kind of interdisciplinarity possible. Not a physicalist interpretation, not saying that, ultimately economics is physics or ultimately decision making is physics, not like that. From the perspective of philosophical principles and possible mathematical apparatus, with the help of which you can explain the data. As Professor Chakravarti was saying, that utmost important is to look into the data and trying to relate that to a possible mathematical framework, because mathematics is a good language to use. It's not to say that mathematics is the only language, because we have discussed a lot at our center that there are incompleteness theorems in mathematics also that show the limitations of math. So we have to be careful, and that's a very important thing. Therefore, based on this kind of early ideas, then certainly quantum physics came into being, and then certainly complexity modeling became very kind of robust over time. Now, late in 1990s, basically, some mathematicians and psychologists and economists also, for example, Professor Immanuel Hallen, who could not join us, is one of the editor of our book. They were the pioneers in this particular area. They thought that some mathematical tools which have been widely used in quantum science or information theory in a way, they can be used in the areas like decision science or cognitive science, and their applications in economics and finance and all the other related areas. Now, Professor Chakravarti also mentioned about behavioral economics. So behavioral economics had come earlier to that, and it has shown that there are various ways in which real people decision making deviates from the standard predictions, if you use that particular word. Now, quantum framework was an alternative direction in that route. So it was showing that yes, how people make decision under say deep uncertainty or radical uncertainty, which nowadays have also been called as ambiguity. So how this kind of things can be better understood or described by using certain mathematical models. So this is the way in which came up. So I will fully agree with Professor Sudarshan's viewpoint that it is too early to say it is a paradigmatic shift or something like that, because we keep on using these words very loosely at times. So it is rather to think in the direction of progress. It is rather to think in the direction of enrichment. That is what the quantum-like modeling was doing. Now, since early 2000, I will say that a lot has happened. So quantum-like modeling has really come up very strongly and very evolved. It has really evolved. It has gone into game theory, it has gone into artificial intelligence, and very recently, it has also gone into complex adaptive systems. So that is one thing which we are thinking at our center, because these two streams of knowledge we have synergies between them. They cannot be like isolated. Like network theory, we have heard a lot from Professor Chakravarti also. You see that recently people have been using quantum-like framework in network theory also. Because many times what happens, heterogeneous agents have to make decision under radical uncertainty, which is difficult to capture in standard modeling. So in that case, quantum-like modeling can really give deep insights. Now, going back to the specific book that we have come up with, we will find that the first half was on quantum-like modeling. And here we have quite a few chapters on the pioneers also, like Professor Andrei Trenikov, who is absolutely one of the pioneers. I remember during my PhD days, he inspired me a lot to get into this particular field. He is in Sweden, and he is like one of the most prominent mathematicians in this direction. So he has contributed some chapters, two chapters as I remember, and then Emmanuel certainly, he has written on this chapter and also introductions, etc. Apart from these, we also have chapters with Professor Partha Ghosh, as they just mentioned, a very eminent scientist in our country. And more interestingly, we also have some research associates who are working with us, like Shivani, I remember, and she is now quite well placed in corporate right now. So she has also worked on a particular chapter. So we really hope that this book will give us some thorough introduction to these new things which are happening, new frameworks which are being built. And we have kept this book academically rigorous as well as introductory. So, more and more works will come up, I hope. And then suddenly I will go back to the last point with which I will say, down to Professor Singh, that is public policy. You see that this has been a very kind of thinking at our center that okay, all of this interesting abstract research is happening. If you are into quantum physics, as Professor Chakraborty was reminding me that all that you do is mod of chi square. And so you don't need to care about real world. So that is true. I love that. I don't like reality that much, really. But practically speaking, public policy needs, turns our attention towards that. And very recently, Professor Singh and myself have been working on a framework which we call as integral public policy framework. One of our work is getting published very soon. So I will turn to now Professor Singh to see that how we can make the connections between the dots. And so that's it from my side. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We move on next to Professor Naresh Singh, who is the Executive Dean at JSGP and the Director of the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy. He has a transdisciplinary PhD in environmental sciences with more than 3 decades of public policy experience in senior positions in the United States and the Government of Canada. Professor Singh has a wide range of research interests in the areas in which he teaches in public policy design and evaluation. His work focuses upon decision-making in complex situations, including conflict and peace building, sustainable livelihoods, transformations for catalyzing SDG achievement, international development cooperation, and more. Professor Singh has taught at many universities, including Boston, Harvard, Fordham McGill, Waterloo, and Guelph, before finally joining us at OPGW. Dr. Singh, please go.
Right, so I was quite happy, of course, to hear the quotation that Anirban provided, because Vaspet, who was the big boss of both the dean and myself, Vaspet was the administrator of UNDP, and he was the guy who was responsible for hiring me. And at that time, he believed that the whole place should run on sustainable livelihoods. That's why he had hired me. It's interesting that after these decades, he and I arrived at the same position. We concluded that, I was trained, as you heard, as an environmental scientist, and I thought that, we could solve environmental problems by good science and good economics. 3 years after my PhD, after reflection on the problems I was seeing in the world, I concluded that environmental problems that scientists were working on was really symptoms. They were studying the symptoms. So climate change, species extinction, pollution, ecological degradation are symptoms of a problem that is caused somewhere else. So then I figured out at that time that these problems were being caused by faulty political and economic decision making. 3 years after my PhD. So having published a few papers in some good journals on science, but I realized that the scientist I waste my life So I thought I should get involved in the heart of the problem. So I wrote my first paper on economics 3 years later. But it grew from entropy, economics, and the entropy law. Georgescu Roegen had written a book on all this serious scientific stuff. And so I started working on social sciences, politics, economics. What does it mean? How do you make decisions? Which of course means public policy. Spent several decades of my life working at senior levels of the UN, doing some academic work, worked in about 60 governments around the world and so on. Having done all of that and looking at the progress we were making, which was extremely slow, take climate change as a classic example. They started working on climate change in 1990, Second World Climate Conference in Geneva. We are still struggling after, now it will be 35 years or something, to move anywhere close to 1.5 degrees global warming compared to pre-industrial levels. I wondered. Now I realize that, again, political and economic sciences was not going to provide the answer. That was clear to me. That is when, like Gauss came to the conclusion that we needed a spiritual and cultural revolution. And scientists don't know how to do that. And I wanted to explain, I became more involved in thinking at a different level. At a level where one goes beyond the drivers of the current civilization. I believe, and we had this interesting debate at the conference, Bodine and I were present at Public Affairs Forum of India, where you have all the top CEOs and so on, and all secretaries of government and so on come. And one time we made that point, that this country is unique, or so he thinks. India is unique in the sense that it has a civilizational ethic in which we know, in which Indians know that we are intimately connected with nature and that nature is not just there for extraction and exploitation, which I would argue is the essential principle of the current economic paradigm of both India and the world. But that had put me in a strange place. So I came to visit Jindal in 2020, 2019, and I met Professor Patra, and we had a little chat, and I said, you know, economics is headed in the wrong direction, in my view. He has his view, economists have his view, I have a different view. And we have to do something different from the way we teach and the way we do research. And that was the birth of the center, which gave rise to the first baby, which is here in front of you, this book. Others are coming. Our book on applied spirituality and sustainable development policy will be published on the 14th of December, which is the other side of all of this work. Let me just say that what is it that I'm hoping to get out of this work, this book, and the other books that will come, and the papers that we are writing, and the partnerships that we are establishing. I'm hoping that we will generate insights that are different and hopefully complementary, but sometimes not complementary, but that will provide new insights into way we do social sciences, economics or politics or anything else. And why? Because I believe that economics is clearly the most dominant science in public policy, no doubt. Whether it should be so is a different question, but it happens to be so. And public policy has to shift. It has to shift both on its scientific axis as well as on the human axis. And that human axis has to now go beyond psychology, where it's moving towards psychology. So now we have work, well-established work on behavioral sciences and public policy, going beyond behavioral economics, public policy. So we are moving ahead slowly, but I believe we have to go deeper than that. and to come to the core question of the real nature of human beings and how do we get that into public policy. That's the goal I've set myself for the little academic work that I intend to do. So this center does a lot of theoretical work, frameworks and models, but the chapter that I have written is one on focus on complexity and public policy. What does it mean for public policy in health policy? We now have a PhD student who is going to write her thesis on complexity in health. What does it mean for public policy in education? I'm leaving tonight to go to a strange conference, which the dean was kind enough to nominate me for, and the vice chancellor agreed that I should go. And I guess my qualification for that is that the China Agricultural University in Beijing. The reason for that is that my master's degree is in agriculture. So I was thinking, what am I going to do there? I don't do agriculture anymore. But then it occurred to me, what about agricultural policy? I should now look into what is the China Agricultural University doing about agricultural policy. How do they make public policy in agriculture? What should we be doing? So I hope to come back from that conference with some thinking. And how do you work on complex problems in agriculture? So they said at this party forum that we went to the start yesterday, the guy said that this country will only be developed when 2% of its people are in agriculture. This 45% you have now must disappear. They must go into industries. Now that is the model of the developed world. So the US is 2% in agriculture, and Europe and so on, and Canada and so on. A few people produce all the food, and the rest are in some value-added industry, industrial growth, and so on. So I listened to that and I thought, sure. But I'm not sure that that is the correct thinking. Not sure. 2%. I mean, a country like this, maybe. And then when you think about it, all right, a developed country means what? In GDP per capita, it means 20,000 US dollars GDP per capita. But I didn't hear anybody talk about the values of the developed countries. Now, what about the values? Extract everything, live as individuals, destroy social capital. Is this really a developed country? Just because you're 20,000 US dollars per capita income? Now, if you ask people around the world, what is development for them? What does development mean? They will say the lifestyle of North America and Western Europe. Now, you know very well that if all of us were to have the lifestyle of Western Europe and North America, the first thing we will need 3 planets. And we only have one right now that we know about. Maybe Chandrayaan-5 will find life on some other planet, and we will all go there, we'll see. Right now, as a scientist, I can't say that the evidence is strong enough for us to go there. So we only have one planet, that's one. But we have not learned how to live as humans and to share values that are different from GDP per capita. So I hope that this kind of insight will do 2 things. One is we'll change the value system by our work on applied spirituality and sustainable development policy. But we will only make that credible if it is anchored in the best science possible. And we will do that as well. That is what we're doing here. So our work is trying to bring together value system change as well as good science, good economics, good politics, which we lead there. So when we teach sustainable development to our students, and we continue to teach more and more of the same, it really bothers me that we teach, this SDGs, and the SDGs are hopelessly flawed, but it is the best we have. I mean, students in my class on systems thinking know how hopelessly flawed the SDGs are. So we have to really do some different things. And that's why I was so happy when several of our faculty colleagues here and from around the world came together to write this book. We are making it quite practical. And today we had a conversation. Professor Anirban is here, so we use the opportunity to talk about our future collaboration. Fortunately, he's gone back to being a scholar. He was an administrator for too long at Punjab. And now we can talk about research and teaching things differently. So we'll be looking for research grant proposal for PhD students. We'll be working on things like biases in AI, algorithmic biases, police force. We'll talk about how to look at tuberculosis differently. We will look at, stuff including financial decision systems making. We will look at transportation. How do you do transportation policy differently? How do you do agriculture policy differently? Concrete, real policy work. So bringing together the values and the science together, PhD research, teaching, publications, all of that. It's our dean and our vice chancellor, not the dean so much. But the vice chancellor, the only one Scopus publications, thank God this one is Scopus Index. So, we'll have to figure out when you have a chapter in the book and you are an editor, well, you get two Scopus publications. So hopefully you do right. So I want in closing to just acknowledge our two coordinators who are there, who are Manasa and Harpreet, who will be doing tremendous work in helping me to run the center, and people like Arjit who have been with us for a long time, and others who might be here. We have lots of research assistants who are doing a lot of good work. We need to get this out. I keep saying that I worry that we might be one of the best kept secrets. And I hope that will not be the case, that we'll have lots of blogs and so on. So come and join us and help get out the word that we are here to help our little bit to make the world a better place. Since the dean was instrumental, I was surprised that any dean of a public policy school will allow me to have a center with the word spirituality in it. So I was fortunate that way to have a dean who will allow that. And so I take the opportunity then to present this book to him. And here. So you see, this is an autograph copy. Cover the next two first. All right, I got it.
Thank you so much, Professor Naresh. We really appreciate your invaluable contributions to the center. I think your support has been very instrumental for me and Manasa, and we both would like to extend our gratefulness for giving us this opportunity. We're very grateful. Moving on to the next contributors, we have Professor Sunetra Ghatak. She holds a PhD in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. She has earlier held various research positions at institutions like National Institute for Public Finance and Policy, Research and Information System for Developing Countries, Microinsurance Academy, National Center for Agricultural Economics and Policy Research, Institute for Studies in Industrial Development. She has contributed several research papers in various prominent peer-reviewed national, international journals and edited volumes. She has participated in both international and national conferences to present her work and has been invited as a resource person by various institutions to deliver lectures. She has also reviewed various articles for various journals. Professor, on to you. What do you think?
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to write this paper. I think Professor Chakraborty already mentioned that it gave us a opportunity to share our perspective. Because when I see the cover of the book, that quantum decision theory and complexity modeling, all these words are like vocabulary to me. I'm very much illiterate to the subject, but yes, as an economist, I have a training on economics and I know how I can contribute to the public policy. So in my chapter 11, if you are interested, you can read page number 217 to 230. I have done research especially on trade, international trade, looking at the Belt and Road Initiative, how it is impactful for Asian countries. Because when I was looking at the literature and trying to understand the complexity issues other than my usual training on econometrics, that is usually we look at the determinants or the causality or maybe the kind of impact evaluation we generally do by practicing economics and econometrics using the estimation field that we generally use. So I was curious to understand how other than my usual econometrics techniques can understand the impact of different corridor impact and so I'll brief you the objective of the paper, and of course I'll let you know the data and methodology that we used for this paper, and the final conclusion, of course, leading by the findings that we observed. As already I mentioned, the title of the paper, Trade Intervention under Belt and Road Initiative with Asian Economics. Why I have chosen Asian economics? Because of course, India comes under this. And when I was looking at literature, but I observed that most of the literature are actually focusing on African countries or European countries under the Belt and Initiative, the role of China. Strategic impacts are there. The international relation, of course, the China's motive to do all these soldier projects, that debates are there. But my logic of doing this paper was very simple, not very complex. Rather, I was looking at the impact of Belt and Road initiatives, which actually initiated 2013, 2000. Now already we covered 1 decade. But I wrote the paper when we took data from year 2010 to latest, I think 19, we have captured to understand before and after initiation of this, to understand trade estimates that whether we have a positive role of this kind of corridors, especially taking care of Asian countries, 32 countries I have captured in my study based on availability of the data. So as I said, that BRI is basically aimed to connect Asia, Africa, and European country. As of now, August 2023, 215 cooperation documents are there, where 155 countries and 32 international corporations are coming under this huge connectivity projects. So our objective of this paper, along with my co-author Shayantan Roy, who was then doing masters, so another young fellow who helped me out to understand this complexity issue, along with my econometrics and economics understanding, where the logical sense of this paper is that this kind of corridor definitely will impact people-to-people cooperation, ties, economic activity, international trade. So in terms of economics, we think when connectivity happens, we have a positive impact in terms of economic activity, like in terms of different trade activity, or maybe in terms of economic growth and so on. So that is the kind of boost factor when I started doing this paper. So the objective I already mentioned, that would answer whether BRI is certainly worthwhile initiative, especially focusing on Asian countries. So we had a kind of impression looking at different literature which looked at African countries, European countries, and everywhere we found positive impact of BRI. But let me mention one thing, that part of literature dealt with gravity model framework, leading with the economics point of view, and part of literature I have found neural network model coming under your complexity modeling. So I was trying to capture both of them to understand the compatibility, or maybe to understand the estimation power of both. So my knowledge of economics along with the complexity modeling knowledge, how beautifully I can portray the estimation power or the prediction of trade activity across Asian countries. That was my objective of the paper. As I mentioned, bilateral trade flow. I have taken 1990 to 2019. Then when I have written the paper, and I have captured 32 countries along with different explanatory variables like role of economic, geographical, regional trade arrangement, like different kind of density function, population density, infrastructure kind of road density, definitely railway density, which are I have taken for as a control to understand the impact of BRI. Of course, the BRI has been initiated, as I mentioned, 2013, so I have taken a dummy before and after to understand the BRI impact on international trade. And we have, as I said, Asian countries, we have taken the bilateral trade between China to different countries, 32 countries. So it was 31 into 32 kind of matrix we have built, and we have a cross section and the time series data. So it's a panel kind of data set that I have used for my study. Gravity model is known to us. We all have been trained like in economics. So in Wales and PPML estimation procedure, I have run to understand gravity model approach. The kind of gravitational force is there across my trade, distance is there. So, and along with the neural network modeling that we have tested with this huge panel data set. So the hypothesis I have like followed, that efficient and improved infrastructure is expected to connect economies of Asia, which are again like further expected to minimize transportation costs and definitely overall competitiveness of the system, which will influence your economic growth, the positive impact. So the impact of the notion of the hypothesis was that we are expecting positive impact of this connectivity project. That was my hypothesis to see the objective of the research relation. So coming to the methodology part, because that is the main contribution of this paper, it is a two-step method. In the first step, to understand the impact of BRI, we initially estimated the whole data set, 1990 to 2019, to estimate the bilateral trade, like what is actually happening between China to all these 31 set of states, and how the prediction is going to happen. Then, as I said that, I had a notion to see the estimation power between my gravity model with the neural network model, because not by training I was known to this complexity modeling. So my curiosity was whether to learn this, like making myself literate to this new literature, complexity thing, or my knowledge of economics or econometrics is sufficient to recommend or giving a good public policy. That was the curiosity I was having, and thanks to editors that they have given me this kind of opportunity to taste those. So coming to the second part of it, to understand the estimation power, what we did, we actually ran the same model for 90 to 2014 data, right? And then we predict for next 5 years where data were there. So how close it was, like the prediction one, that will give me the understanding how better my techniques are. Of course, you can have a different debate, you can or you cannot do, but that was my understanding and the objective of the paper. So results are there for trade estimates. I will just give you a kind of conclusion that we found that everywhere you have a positive impact, whether you are taking gravity model, where I have used Wales and PPML estimation. So the findings always suggest that, okay, BRI is having a positive impact on your trade intervention across 32 countries, of course, along with China. And the second part, the interesting part, or maybe the curiosity of doing this paper, is the prediction one. So we have predicted, as I said, I run the same model, baseline model for 90 to 2014, and then I predicted for next 5 years, where the data were already there to check the actual trade volume with the estimated one. So I have randomly chosen the countries here. So you can see for India, the gravity prediction is closer. If I just compare the actual prediction for 15 with the gravity prediction and the neural network prediction, even in the Armenia also, like the gravity prediction is closer to the actual one. But if you see the Lao PDR one and the second one, the actual prediction is closer to the neural network model, where gravity one is not giving me the closure prediction, what is there in my actual data. So the prediction bilateral trade between computed is all countries. I have given 4. I have, of course, predicted for 32 countries. It is complex. So I understood it is complex, although my objective of the paper was very simple to understand what is the role of this BRI connectivity and whether having this kind of hypothesis that it has always a positive impact in people-to-people tie or economic growth. It will stimulate your economic activity. It will lower your transportation costs and all. So definitely my point of view or my understanding towards economics is that it will definitely reduce the cost, which will impact positively to your growth. Definitely that is there. But when I'm looking at the public policy, and as all students are here to know that which one is the best estimator, it is complex to tell you, because some of the country, based on their size and definitely based on their volume of trade, I found gravity model is giving you the closer prediction. Some of the countries I found it is neural network model is giving you the final, like the closer prediction. But overall, what we found that bilateral trade flow is showing a positive growth. So having BRI would definitely give you a higher economic growth. So for student, I would say, or for my future research, definitely I will love to read the book to understand more on this issue. But in future research, I will consider both the modeling to estimate so that I will get a robustness check, and definitely the better recommendation I definitely contribute to the literature. So that's all. Definitely, thank you so much. And I would read the book and I will tell you all students to read the chapter to understand the both the techniques. Thank you so much.
If I can just say one quick thing, unfortunately I'll have to leave us by 30 because I have a flight to get. So, but I really like to hear it from colleagues. So maybe we can do something. Can do their big.
Yeah. All right. So next up, we have Professor Debajit Jha, who is an associate professor at JSGP and a member of CF. He holds an MA in economics from the Banaras Hindu University and a PhD in economics from JNU. He previously taught at various colleges in West Bengal. His primary research interest is empirical growth economics, convergence, polarization, structural change, dynamics of regional income, growth episodes, and more. His most recent publications include a paper published in the Computational Economic Journal Rangsinger on post-COVID recovery and long-run forecasting of India. Professor?
I think we can start and then.
Yeah,
Start
talking.
Right. So,
Okay, thank you. So first, thank you to all the editors of the book. They have invited me to write the chapter, and it was a kind of experience that we have started the center early to 2021, right? And actually, we have written the paper. So basically, that paper, it has taken quite a long time, long discussions among 4 of us. And and just actually the second wave of COVID has finished, and we have started working on that paper. And actually, so in the public policy domain, during that time, there was a kind of a conversation that was going on that that many people have started saying that the reverse migration, which was happening in the initiation of lockdown in India, so that reverse migration was a kind of a maybe most important thing, that how COVID has spreaded throughout this country from one area to the others. So this paper, actually we have tried to build a data set for that. First of all, there was not a data set to understand the reverse migration, because the migration data that we were having till that point, it was the census migration data, and it was quite a old data set. Last census has been conducted in 2011. So what we have done in this paper is basically we have taken the data from the special trains that those were running after the COVID, after the lockdown, to actually from one part from another part of the country. And we've scrapped the data using some kind of crawl. And then we, because those data was not publicly available. So then we tried to construct a kind of a complex network. And then we have used another econometric model to understand the impact of, say, these train migrations on the spread of the virus. So, okay, so these were the some of the networks that we have constructed, and these actually the darker lines are showing the more people are migrating from one place to another. So this is done from the Census of India 2011 data. And then these are actually the train migration data. And so this first one is the full sample. Full sample means the period from 1st June 2020 to 7 June 2021. And I think there is some, okay. And the second wave, we have focused the second wave mostly because that was more disastrous for Indian states. And actually the second wave was from 14th of February 2021 to 14th of May 2021. And these actually the networks, if we see, then basically we will see that actually Maharashtra was one of the states. Those were the leading in these COVID cases, because most of the in terms of our migration data, it was showing that most of the reverse migrations were happening from Maharashtra to other parts. And even when we have plotted the COVID fatality and COVID cases as well, we have seen that this Maharashtra is basically leading here. So specifically in the second wave. So basically the virus was first started impacting in Maharashtra, and then it was spread to the other parts. And then in terms of econometric model, what we found that actually if there is an increasing one more person travel from Maharashtra through train in per lakh population of a particular state, then the chance of increase of COVID cases was 0.013 in that particular state. And then we found that actually the number of COVID beds or number of beds was available in the public hospitals. So those were some kind of a crucial, having kind of a crucial impact. So we tried to give a kind of a public policy conclusion that actually if we can develop more public infrastructure, specifically the health infrastructure, then we can handle this kind of problems in much better way. So thank you. That was the kind of a summary of that paper. Thank you.
Wonderful. This one to make a comment that authorship was very interdisciplinary. There was a scientist, an economist, and physicist working together. And same with her case, actually, the science student working with the economist. That's what we were saying, that each of us have different skills there. When we need to.
So Neil was from engineering.
No,
Rishi was from physics. Yeah.
In Shahid's paper also, we had a sociologist, we had a mathematician, this me.
So that interdisciplinary thinking actually helps us to bring new aspects.
So that's what contextuality is. Cause, evidence, and exemplified by the example of Rumi and then Emmanuel Kant, relativism.
Yes.
So, a blind man and an elephant. If you run a division, you will say it is like a cave, just touching a cave.
Alright. So our last speaker for today is Professor Shahrukh Hussain, who has recently earned his doctorate from the School of Computational and Integrative Sciences at JNU. His research work is focused on studies of data-driven complex socioeconomic systems using interdisciplinary techniques and data science approaches. His main research interests include, but are not limited to, complex systems, dynamical systems, socioeconomic systems, and computational social sciences. He has a wide range of teaching experiences from the courses spanning from social networks and epidemiology, complex systems, complexity and public policy, and agent-based modeling. Professor Shari, please.
5 minutes, right? Yeah.
Okay, I'll just wrap that.
Any academic can finish in 5 minutes. But
All right, so thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I would like to thank Professor Singh, Professor Chakrabarti, and Professor Patra for this opportunity. And I think it's a moment of great happiness when we see all of our efforts. I mean, in terms of complexity, it's interaction. All of our interaction organized itself in the form of chapter and emerged into a form of this book. So I would say, yeah, so
that's the best summer.
And throughout the time with ups and downs, but it emerged into the form of this wonderful book. So I would suggest you please go through that. As of now, we are witnessing that the world surrounding us is changing very rapidly. One example could be technological changes, and that is triggering societal complexification, which is like adoption of ideas from AI, adoption of data-driven techniques. Second could be climate change, again, that is triggering societal complexification. It needs to be addressed. Third could be democratic backsliding, geopolitical tensions, with the rise of data-driven technologies, right? So then I would say when we have these pressing issues and there is a burden on policy, there is a pressure on policy. Policy, we have to address certain situations and come out with some policies, and these policies requires evidence. Where are those evidence? So those evidence could be from the perspective of data that we are inherently generating throughout our activities, individually, collectively, and globally. It could be financial, social, or socioeconomic, right? So throughout the help of these techniques that we have discussed in complexity, we can have these techniques came with insight for this data. We can gather this data, get some insight, and from those insights we can facilitate these policy recommendations. So in this paper, so that's what our chapter addresses, which is innovation diffusion with intergroup migration. So earlier innovation diffusion was studied widely, but without migration. This is the first time we have introduced the concept of migration. So for example, in just simple words, it is like adoption of certain practices triggers a feedback in a different group of population, where after observing this group, they stop using that practices. So it's like I have a group, or let's take an example from California. So there is a Beverly Hills region and another normal region. Hollywood stars use certain names for their kids. After watching them, the normal population started adopting those names for their kids. Over the course of time, when Hollywood stars observe that these names are used by these normal middle class people, they stop using those names. That means because of that feedback, there is a chain reaction that triggered, right? So one practice was there, after seeing them, they adopted, right? And then because of this adoption, they stopped using it. We brought a framework, a mathematical framework and computational model, which is Volcker-Pacala model. We introduced nonlinear dynamics, and we established and confirmed the model that for a group of population where we have
above 55 population and under 25 population, the use of certain device, which is tabloid or Facebook or Insta. So after seeing kids under 25, adult population started using those devices, right? So rate of adoption after observing this population starts increasing. And once it starts increasing, the younger population, they were like, oh, this thing is being used by elders. They started switching from that to a newer version, which is like shifting from Facebook to Insta, or it could be from tabloid to iPhone. Right. So that is what. So one reason could be their privacy is at stake, or it could be they are more trendy because of the age factor. So what is the policy aspect? So policy aspect is there is a practice which needs to be shifted, and there is a thing which needs to be adopted, right? And here comes the scope of policy. So adoption of, let's say, plastic waste. We want to implement certain policies that abandons the use of plastic. That's one aspect. And then how to encourage the adoption of healthy or green practices. So it facilitates, this framework facilitates how to adopt healthy practices and how to get rid of those unhealthy practices which are like affecting in environment and demography. So that's it. Thank you.
No, my father has been the day when people academics just present. He could go on for 5 minutes. I don't work is worth 5 hours. But we all have to be free.
All right. That brings us to the end of our list of speakers today. Thank you all for being here. Before we wrap up, we'd like to present a small token of our appreciation to Professor Anindya Chakraborty. So I invite Dean Sudarshan and Professor Naresh to please do that. It's over there.
You're a visitor. Distinguished visitor. That's very good, you know.
Was there a book in your hand? Okay. No, we have to take it out.
Oh, you have to garnish it. And explain the color.
Yeah, we increased number of stripes. Now 12. We had a previous one which had fewer stripes. So we want you to come up as often so that we have one line. As a color. It's quite good.
Are we gonna have a little discussion?
If we have time, we can have.
This time is over. So if you have any questions, please send an email, please.
I have a question. I have looked after your message, I have looked on the outline of the book, and I'm specifically interested in the first and the second chapter. I think it was written by Titernikov.
Andrei Titernikov.
Yeah. So I'm interested in the model application of mathematical model, complexity model to consciousness unconsciousness correlation. So my question is like, which concept of unconscious is being applied in this case? Is it Jungian unconscious? Is it other model? And if you can say something about this chapter, because I'm specifically interested in the second chapter.
I think that relates to quantum-like modeling generally.
Yeah.
So what quantum-like modeling has been doing is basically explain the cognitive science part, right? You know, it started off in that way. So say, for example, how different kind of decision making can be described in a more comprehensive manner. And the mathematical tools which have been used a lot, as Andrei and our chapters also will show, is technically called as Hilbert space model. Hilbert space model is used. But your question is more related to conscious unconscious kind of iterations.
Yeah.
So this is what I will talk about, that there is one particular theoretician, Helmholtz. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing the name correctly, Helmholtz. So Helmholtz has an interesting idea long back that perceptions, perceptions create sensations. So this particular path of perception to sensation, that is what has been modeled in this kind of frameworks which Andrei is working on. This has also a very interesting parallel in quantum physics, when one of the pioneers, John von Neumann, he talked about psychophysical parallelism. So that was his concept. So the measurements, observations, how it happens in the physical world, that has a parallelism, but not equivalence to what happens in, say, conscious unconscious connections. So these are the ways in which quantum like modeling is evolving.
We should mention, if I might, that the modeling done on consciousness by Tononi and others.
Yes, that's a different. Yeah.
That's the most common published work on consciousness modeling, but it's not the kind of consciousness that we are studying in our center,
Yeah.
which is more based on Advaita Vedanta and the understanding of a universal consciousness which we all share. But I don't know that that is modelable, if I can find the word.
There is actually.
Oh, that chapter by Krelikov, yeah.
That's very good. That is into this.
There is a Dutch psychologist who is working on, he has a book published, Smart Unconsciousness.
Okay.
And he does empirical studies, experimental
Ah.
studies of interaction in cognitive decision making
Yeah, that is
between
what-
consciousness and unconsciousness.
Exactly.
And it's quite testable, like he makes this model quite like operational and provable and testable.
That is very similar to what we work. That is
Okay.
in that lab. Of course.
But you should have that
Yeah.
developed as well.